thinking about selling your home in Monte Vista, not next month, not even this year, but simply starting to have that quiet internal conversation about what it might look like, this is the moment where your outcome actually begins. Because most owners completely miss this window. They believe the process starts when they're ready to list. But when in reality, the process starts the moment the idea enters your mind, and the time between those two moments is where the meaningful amount of equity is either protected or unintentionally lost. What that looks like in real life is not obvious at first. It shows up in rushed timelines, reactive decisions, skipped preparation steps, hiring whoever's available instead of the right people, listing before the home is truly ready, and entering the market hoping things will go well instead of knowing you're positioned correctly. And in a neighborhood like Monte Vista, that difference is not subtle. It is significant because this is not a uniform production style market where homes are interchangeable. This is a historically rich, architecturally diverse, highly nuanced area where every home competes on its own condition, its own story, and its own level of presentation. That means your home is not just competing on price, it's competing on perception. And perception is built long before your home ever hits the market, which is exactly why we're going to walk you through 10 reasons why sellers in Monte Vista should find a realtor as soon as they think they might want to sell, along with a clear timeline and specific steps so you understand not just what to do, but when to do it. Because when you understand this process at a higher level, you stop reacting and start positioning. And positioning is what creates leverage. And leverage is what protects your outcome. The first reason is that Monte Vista operates as a true micro market within San Antonio, meaning the broad market headlines do not tell you how your home will perform. Because within this neighborhood, you have different architectural styles, different levels of renovation, lots of different configurations, and different buyer expectations, depending on how a home is presented. And this leads directly into step number 1, which should happen 6 to 9 months before you ever plan to list. And that is your initial strategy consultation. This is not about choosing a price. It's about understanding positioning, how your home will be perceived, what buyers will notice immediately, and what may create hesitation, and where your opportunities are. And this step often surfaces things that sellers would not have considered on their own. And that early clarity allows you to make decisions proactively instead of under pressure later. And that leads to reason number 2, which is that preparation always takes longer than expected. This is where this step number 2 begins, which is your 6+ month preparation phase. This is where sellers unintentionally go off track because they assume preparation means renovating, when in reality, preparation means evaluating, prioritizing, sequencing, and in Monte Vista, more updates do not automatically equate to more value because buyers in this area tend to respond to cohesion, condition, and how a home feels as a whole, not just the presence of new finishes. So during this phase, you may evaluate paint condition, woodwork, flooring, roofing, systems, landscaping, and general maintenance. But the goal is not to do everything, is to do the right things in the right order with enough time to do them well, and that requires guidance because without it, it is very easy to spend money in areas that do not create return while overlooking the areas that actually influence buyer perception. And that leads to reason number 3, which is access to the right vendors. Because in a neighborhood like Monte Vista, where homes often require a more thoughtful approach to maintenance, repair, and presentation, the best contractors, stagers, photographers, and inspectors are not sitting around waiting for last-minute calls. They are scheduled out, sometimes weeks or months in advance. And when you wait until you're ready to list, you're no longer choosing among the best options. You're choosing from what is left. And that leads directly into step number 3, which happens around 4 to 6 months before listing, and that is assembling your vendor team. This is one of the most underestimated advantages of starting early because the difference between an average listing and a high-performing listing is often not the home itself. It is the quality of execution, and the execution is driven by the people involved. And when you have time, you can be intentional about who you bring in, how the work is scheduled, and how each step builds on the next. And that leads to the reason number 4, which is avoiding unnecessary spending. And this is where step number 4 becomes critical, which is making strategic decisions about improvements. And this is where many sellers either over-improve or under-prepare, and both can be costly because without a clear strategy, it's very easy to assume that more upgrades will automatically lead to higher sale price, when in reality, buyers are evaluating the home as a complete experience. And that means consistency, flow, and presentation matter just as much as the individual updates themselves. And this is where a knowledgeable realtor helps you evaluate what buyers expect at your price point. What should be improved? What should be left as is? And what can be addressed through presentation rather than renovation? This is also where we begin introducing one of the most important concepts in the entire selling process, which is staging. And at this point in the timeline, we are not executing staging yet, but we are planning for it, because staging is not something you do at the last minute. It is something you build towards, and the decision you make in this early phase will directly impact how effective your staging can be later. And this is where many sellers misunderstand staging. They think it is optional. They think it is decorative. They think it is only relevant for vacant homes, when in reality, staging is a strategic tool used to guide buyer perception. And that perception begins with how the home is experienced visually, both online and in person. And this is why starting early matters so much, because it gives you the time to align your preparation with how the home will ultimately be presented. And this is also where we need to clearly define the timeline so you understand how everything fits together. 6 to 9 months before listing is strategy and evaluation. 4 to 6 months before listing is preparation and vendor coordination. And everything you do during this time is setting the foundation for how your home will perform once it hits the market. And this is also where we need to address one of the most expensive mistakes sellers make, which really is waiting too long to start. Because when you compress this timeline into a few weeks, you lose the ability to be intentional. Every decision becomes reactive, and that often leads to rushed work, missed details, and a listing that enters the market without a full preparation. And that directly impacts how buyers perceive the home, how quickly it generates interest, and really ultimately the strength of the offers you receive. This is why starting early is not about doing more work. It is about creating more control, because when you have the time, you have options. And when you have options, you make better decisions. And better decisions are what lead to stronger outcomes. And this is where we're going to put a pause in the first section, because in the next part, we're going to move deeper into the most critical phase of the process, which is the 60 to 90-day window before listing, where staging strategy becomes real, where documentation and inspection preparation come into play, and where many of the decisions that directly impact your final outcome are made. And as we move into this next phase, this is where everything begins to shift from planning into visible execution. This 60 to 90-day window before you list your home is one of the most critical stages in the entire process, because this is where preparation becomes the presentation. And presentation is what buyers actually experience. And this is where reason number 5 comes into focus, which is documentation and disclosure preparation. But before we even get into that, we need to anchor this section in step number 5, which is your staging strategy. Because at this point, you're no longer thinking about staging conceptually. You're making real decisions that will directly impact how your home is perceived. And this is where we need to slow down and go much deeper than most conversations ever go, because staging is often treated like an accessory to the process, when in reality, it's one of the central drivers of how quickly your home sells and how strongly it performs. And according to the National Association of Realtors, a significant majority of buyers' agents report that staging makes it easier for a buyer to visualize a property as their future home, and that alone is important. But what is even more important is how staging impacts behavior, because buyers do not evaluate homes purely based on logic. They respond to how a space feels, how it flows, how easily they can understand how to live in it. The staging bridges that gap between structure and experience. And this is where we need to clearly separate two paths, because staging is not a one-size-fits-all if your home is occupied. Staging is about editing, refining what already exists. And if your home is vacant, staging is about building the experience from the ground up, and both require strategy. Both require time. And if your home is occupied, one of the most important shifts you have to make is understanding that you are no longer living in the home the way you have been. you're preparing it for market. And that means decluttering at a level that often, well, it feels uncomfortable. Depersonalizing spaces so buyers can project themselves into the home. And simplifying each room so that the layout, light, scale become the focus. This often means removing a significant portion of furniture, reorganizing storage areas, cleaning countertops, and creating visual breathing room throughout the home. Because when a home feels crowded, it honestly just feels smaller. And when it feels simplified, it reads as more open and functional. It's not about making your home feel empty. It's about making it feel intentional. And if your home is vacant, the strategy shifts entirely because empty homes create a completely different challenge. They tend to feel smaller than they actually are, and believe it or not, and they can feel colder. Buyers often struggle to understand how the rooms function without visual reference points. And this is where bringing in furniture, art, and accessories becomes critical. Not excessive, but intentional, because properly scaled furniture defines spaces, creates flow, and helps buyers understand how each area of the home work functions. Which helps them leave feeling like they understand how the home works. This is where staging and photography become inseparable because your photos are your first showing. But in today's environment, the majority of buyers will form their initial impression of your home before they step inside. And the listings that are staged and professionally photographed consistently generate more online engagement, more showings, and stronger early interest, which is critical in the first 7 to 10 days on the market. This is where momentum is created or lost. And once that window passes, it becomes much harder to recreate that initial level of attention. And this is why the investment in staging is not about aesthetics. It's about performance, because homes that are presented well tend to sell faster. And faster sales leads to stronger negotiating positions, and that directly impacts your net outcome. And this leads directly to step number 6, which is documentation and disclosure preparation. And while this might not feel as visible as staging, equals equally important, because this is where you begin organizing the story of your home in a way that is clear, transparent, and accessible to buyers. This includes the gathering of past records of improvements, maintenance, warranties, and any relevant information about the property. And starting this process early allows you to fill in gaps, locate documents, and ensure that everything is ready to go before you go to market, which builds confidence with buyers and reduces delays once you're under contract. And that leads to reason number 6, which is inspection awareness. This is where step 7 comes into play. Typically 30 to 60 days before listing, this step is about understanding how your home may perform during a buyer's inspection. And this can be done through a pre-listing inspection or through a detailed walkthrough with your realtor. And the goal here is not perfection. It is awareness, because when you understand potential issues ahead of time, you can decide how to address them, whether that means making repairs, gathering estimates, or preparing disclosures. This puts you in a position of control instead of reaction. And one of the biggest advantages of this step is that it reduces the likelihood of surprises during a transaction, which are often the source of renegotiation. And when you reduce surprises, you reduce stress, you protect your position, and that leads into reason number 7, which is pricing psychology. This is where step number 8 becomes critical, which is refining your pricing strategy about 30 days before the listing. This is where many sellers default to looking at past sales and choosing a number. But pricing is not about data. It's about perception. It's about understanding how buyers will evaluate your home relative to current competition, how pricing influences search behavior, and how to position your home to generate interest and urgency. And when you've gone through the preparation process correctly, when your home is staged effectively, and when your photos are strong, you have the ability to position your home in a way that attracts attention instead of chasing it. This is also where the timing of your launch becomes important, because the goal is not just to list, it is to launch. And a well-prepared home entering the market with a strong presentation and a clear pricing strategy creates momentum. And momentum is what drives showings, engagements, and ultimately offers. This is where we need to reinforce the timeline again, because at 60 to 90 days before listing, you are in a staging strategy and documentation. At 30 to 60 days, you're in inspection awareness and pricing refinement. and each step is building towards the next. When these steps are rushed or skipped, the impact compounds, and this is where we see some of the most costly mistakes sellers make, which is entering the market before the home is fully prepared, using photos that don't showcase the home effectively, or pricing without a clear understanding of how the home will be perceived. And these decisions often lead to longer time on the market, pricing adjustments, and concessions that really could have been avoided. This is why this phase is so important, because this is where the majority of visible transformation happens. This is where your home shifts from being lived in to being presented for sale. And how well you execute during this window directly influences how your home performs once it hits the market. And this is where we're going to go into transition into the final section, because next we're going to walk through the final 2 to 3 weeks before listing, the execution phase, the role of photography, the first days on market, the most common mistakes that cost sellers the most money, along with exactly how to avoid them. And as we move into the final phase, this is where everything you have done up to this point either comes together with clarity and intention or begins to reveal the gaps that were unaddressed. Because the final 2 to 3 weeks before your home hits the market really is not about scrambling. It's about executing a plan that has already been built. This is where reason number 8 comes into focus, which is marketing preparation. And step number 9, which is final staging execution and photography preparation. And this is the moment where your home transitions from preparation into presentation. And this is where we need to be very clear about something that many sellers underestimate. Photography is not a formality. It is not just documentation. It is your first showing. It's your first impression. And in many cases, it's the only chance you have to capture a buyer's attention before they decide whether or not to engage further. And in today's environment, where buyers are scrolling through listings quickly and making decisions in seconds, the quality of your photos, the way your home is staged, the lighting, the composition, the flow from one image to the next, all of these elements work together to tell a story. And if that story is unclear, incomplete, or underwhelming, buyers move on. And once they move on, it is actually really difficult to bring them back. This is why homes that are thoughtfully staged and professionally photographed consistently generate more online engagement, more showings, and stronger early interest. And that early interest is critical because the first 7 to 10 days on the market is where your listing has the most visibility, the most attention, and the greatest opportunity to create momentum. And momentum is what drives strong outcomes, because when multiple buyers are engaging at the same time, it creates a different dynamic than when the home sits with a limited activity. And this is where we see one of the most expensive mistakes sellers make, which is rushing to the market before the home is truly ready, using photos that don't really fully represent the space, or skipping staging in order to save time or money. And what ends up happening is the home enters the market without a strong first impression. It receives less initial attention, and the seller is then forced to adjust, whether that means price reductions, concessions, extended time on market, and those adjustments directly impact your net outcome. This is why everything we've talked about up to this point matters, because it builds towards this moment. When this moment is executed well, it creates a completely different trajectory for your listing, and that leads to reason number 9, which is your personal transition planning, because while your home is being prepared and presented, your next move is also taking shape. This is where step number 10 comes in, which is aligning your timeline, your move, your next living situation, so that everything flows together. I'm Caroline Decherd, Park Properties Group at the Phyllis Browning Company, specialize in historic homes in Monte Vista. Would love to talk to you about listing your home. Feel free to DM us or give us a call.